There's no denying that getting started and forming a new habit around something you want to do on a regular basis is incredibly hard. Now, the initial action might be easy. In fact, it might even be easy for the first few times to get into the routine. You may feel great, you might not, and you might be really ultimately proud of the work that you're doing in the very beginning. But after a certain point, most of us are going to fall off the wagon. I was thinking about this for myself because I, like you, has struggled with this huge. In most of the areas of my life, I had a form of ADD around different vehicles, paths, and pursuits that I wanted to have. And while I would pride myself on my ability to come up with a new thing, get excited and motivated to start, following through has always been really tough, with a couple of big exceptions. So when I was learning endurance training as an athlete, which is not something I had done prior, for whatever reason, it stuck. And I was reflecting just yesterday on what were the mechanics for me of what helped it get that way, what helped me stay committed into that follow through. So now, even to this point, I have somewhat of a habit around it. And there were a couple of things that came to mind early on. First was I leaned into my weaknesses, not necessarily my strengths. Now, this feels a little counter to what I have heard time and time again, or even read about over here, over there, and otherwise. But let me explain what I mean. One of my big weaknesses is that historically, I'm a yes guy. So I will quickly commit myself to something that I don't have the bandwidth to be able to do. Looking back on what got me started in the very beginning was I quickly signed up to work with a trainer. Now, I've not only had a triathlon trainer, but I also had a strength and endurance trainer. And what I discovered was this, that by committing to a recurring training session every single week, where the cancellation period was much longer than it might be to just say, hey, I won't be there, or hey, I'm not going to show up to the gym today, or hey, I'm not going to go for that run. Because of that, I ended up staying pretty committed just by the default of having already committed to saying yes to being in that training session. So it was that personal accountability from other weaknesses around saying yes to other people that I was able to lean into, and as a result of that, stay more committed to that practice. Relatedly was I found other areas throughout my training schedule where there was a degree of commitment that I had to make towards someone else. Now, I'm not somebody that's been overly motivated by big public proclamations of I'm going to do this and now I feel obligated to the social internets of worlds to stay committed to that. That's not something that motivates and drives me. But what I did find was that if I would commit to either running with somebody else, cycling with somebody else, or most importantly, doing an event on a particular day with somebody else especially, that I was far more committed to stay on track and stay on course. The weakness there that I would lean into is my sense of obligation to that event and that timeline. Some of this comes from spending so much time as an actor where opening night was just a thing. You just didn't move opening night. So because we always knew when the show was going to start, there was that sense of deep obligation and responsibility to make sure you had your shit together so that you didn't fall flat on that day. Well, the same thing can apply and has applied for me. So those two things, leaning into my weakness of being accountable to somebody else and quickly saying yes when I probably should have said no. And the second thing was leaning into an event and a target date that I feel totally obligated to and totally unwilling to move was something that really helped me stay committed and on track for my habits. And now, 5 years later, it's kind of ingrained in my body that if I'm not doing something physical at least 4 or 5 days a week, it feels very, very weird. So consider that. Maybe you should lean into your weakness, embrace it, take advantage of it, utilize it to your benefit, not just as something that makes you depressed or frustrated about yourself. Something to think about.